The great hall of the Conclave of Stars stretched wide and tall, its ceiling made of glass that showed the endless black of space beyond. Thousands of stars burned in the distance, cold and ancient, watching the gathering below like silent judges who had seen empires rise and fall. Ambassador Kethvorin stood at the center of the hall, his scaled body catching the light as he moved. The Silith were a proud race, their green skin marked with golden patterns that showed their rank and their victories. And Kethvorin wore more gold than any other in the room. Around him sat the representatives of a dozen elder races, beings who had traveled between stars when humanity still lived in caves and feared the thunder. They sipped strange drinks and watched Kethvorin with eyes that held the weight of millennia. "Let me tell you about the humans," Kethvorin said, his voice carrying through the hall like a song that mocked its own subject. "Let me tell you what we learned when we broke them 30 years ago." The gathered aliens leaned forward, some with amusement and others with mild interest. Humanity was still new to the galactic stage. Barely 200 years since their first ship had crossed into the void, and they were considered children by every species present. "They came to us with fire in their eyes," Kethvorin continued, spreading his arms wide as he paced the floor. "They demanded respect, demanded territory, demanded that we treat them as equals." Can you imagine the arrogance? Laughter rippled through the crowd, a sound made of clicks and hisses and rumbles that blended together in shared mockery. "We crushed them in 6 months," the ambassador declared, his chest swelling with pride. 6 months to break their fleets, to push them back to their little home systems, to teach them the truth of their place in this galaxy. They are soft, these humans, emotional and fragile. They break so easily when you apply the right pressure. A tall being with 4 arms nodded slowly, its crystalline eyes reflecting the starlight. "We have found them to be quite pleasant," it said in a voice like wind through hollow stone. "They send us poets and scientists, musicians and philosophers. They seem eager to please." "Exactly." Kethvorin pointed at the speaker with one clawed finger. "They learned their lesson. They know now that they exist at our pleasure. The fire in their eyes has been replaced with gratitude that we allow them to live. More laughter, more agreement." The elder races had seen countless young species try to rise above their station, and all of them had been taught humility and time in the corner of the great hall. Far from the light and the laughter sat a human woman. Her hair was gray and cut short, her face marked with scars that told stories she never shared. And her eyes watched everything with the patience of someone who had learned to wait. Commander Elena Vasquez wore the simple uniform of a military attaché, a position that carried no real power and existed only so that humanity could claim some small presence at these gatherings. She had sat in this corner for 3 days, listening to speeches and toasts and jokes made at her species' expense. She nursed a drink that had gone warm in her hand, something sweet that the conclave served to humans because they believed it was all the human palate could handle. She did not correct them. Kethvorin noticed her at last, his golden eyes finding her in the shadows like a predator spotting wounded prey. He smiled, showing teeth that were sharp and many. "Ah, but we have a human among us," he called out, gesturing toward Elena with theatrical surprise. "Perhaps she would like to add something to our discussion. Tell us, little human, do you disagree with anything I have said?" The hall fell quiet, and all eyes turned to the corner where Elena sat. Some looked at her with pity, others with curiosity, and a few with the eager hunger of those who enjoyed watching the weak. Squirm Elena set down her drink and rose slowly from her seat. Her joints ached with age and old injuries, but she did not let the pain show on her face. She had learned long ago to hide such things. She walked toward the center of the hall, her boots making soft sounds against the polished floor. Kethvorin watched her approach with amusement dancing in his eyes. Waiting for the apology or the submission that he expected, Elena stopped a few paces from the ambassador and looked up at him. He was taller than her by nearly a full meter, and his body radiated the confidence of someone who had never truly been afraid. "You fought us 30 years ago," Elena said, her voice calm and steady. "You pushed us back and claimed victory." "We did more than claim it," Kethvor replied with a sneer. "We earned it with the blood of your soldiers and the fire of your ships." Elena nodded slowly, as if considering his words with great care. "And in all that time, in all your dealings with humanity since then, you have met our diplomats and our scientists. You have traded with our merchants and listened to our artists. As I said, you learned your place." "No," Elena said, and something in her voice made the laughter die before it could begin. "You only saw the friendly ones." The silence that followed was heavy and complete. Kethvorn's smile faltered for just a moment, confusion flickering across his features before he forced it away. "Is that meant to frighten me?" he asked, but his voice had lost some of its music. Elena did not answer. She simply looked at him with eyes that held no fear, no submission, no gratitude for being allowed to live. In her gaze was something old and patient, something that had seen horrors the gathered aliens could not imagine, the ones we send to places like this. Elena said quietly, "Are the ones we trust to be kind. They are the ones who believe in peace, who hope for cooperation, who think the galaxy can be shared." She turned and began walking back to her corner, her words hanging in the air behind her. "Pray you never meet the rest." The great hall remained silent long after she sat back down. And for the first time in living memory, the elder races of the galaxy felt something they had not felt in ages. They felt uncertain. Elena sat alone in her quarters aboard the diplomatic station, staring out through the small window at the stars that burned in the endless dark. Each point of light was a sun, and around each sun spun worlds that held life and death and stories that would never be told. The door chimed softly, and Elena turned from the window with the slow movements of someone who carried heavy burdens. She pressed the panel beside the door, and it slid open to reveal a young alien standing in the corridor. Retharani was small for her species, her blue skin marked with silver patterns that indicated she was still young by the standards of her people. Her large eyes held a curiosity that had not yet been beaten out of her by centuries of politics and war. "May I enter?" Ethrani asked, her voice musical and uncertain. "I wish to speak with you about what you said in the Great Hall." Elena stepped aside and gestured for the young diplomat to enter. She had expected someone to come, though she had thought it would be Kethvorin himself, demanding an explanation or an apology. "You want to know what I meant," Elena said as she walked back to her window. "I want to understand," Ethrani replied, settling onto one of the chairs with the careful grace of her kind. "Your words troubled many in the hall tonight, and I find myself unable to forget them." Elena was quiet for a long moment, watching the stars as memories rose in her mind like ghosts climbing from deep water. She had not spoken of these things in many years, and she was not certain she wanted to speak of them now. "How old do you think I am?" Elena asked without turning from the window. "By human standards, perhaps 60 or 70 of your years." "I am 93 years old," Elena said softly. "I was born on a world called Kepler 442b, and a colony that Earth's government called New Promise. It was far from the core systems, far from Earth's protection, far from anyone who might help if help was needed." Ethrani leaned forward, her silver patterns catching the starlight. "I have not heard of this colony. You would not have. It no longer exists in any official record." Elena finally turned from the window, and in her eyes, Ethrani saw something that made her breath catch in her throat. It was pain, old and deep, the kind of pain that never truly healed. When the Silith came to make war on humanity, they did not strike at Earth first, Elena continued. They were smart enough to know that Earth was well defended, that the core systems would fight with everything they had. So they went for the outer colonies instead, the distant worlds where humans had built new lives far from home. That is a common strategy, Ithrani said quietly. Strike at the weak points first. Yes, but Earth made a choice when the attacks began. They calculated the cost of defending every colony against the Silith fleet, and they decided that some worlds were not worth saving. New Promise was one of those worlds. The words hung in the air between them like smoke from a fire that had burned long ago, but still left ash behind. They abandoned you? Ithrani asked, her voice barely above a whisper. They called it a strategic sacrifice. They pulled back the military ships. They stopped the supply runs. They cut off all communications and told the galaxy that those colonies had fallen. They left 20 million people to die so that Earth could save its strength for battles it cared about winning. Elena moved to sit across from Ithrani, her old bones settling into the chair with familiar aches. I was 11 years old when the last ship left our orbit. I stood with my mother and watched it fly away, and I remember thinking that surely they would come back. Surely they would not leave us alone, but they did not return. No. They did not. The Silith came instead, expecting to find an easy conquest, a colony full of frightened civilians waiting to surrender or die. But something happened that no one expected. Ithrani's eyes were wide now, fixed on Elena's face as if she could see the past written there. What happened? We did not die, Elena said simply. We fought back with mining tools and farming equipment, with homemade weapons and traps built from whatever we could find. We hid in the mountains and the caves. We struck at night and vanished before dawn, and we made the Silith bleed for every meter of ground they tried to take. How is that possible? Your people are considered soft? Elena's smile held no warmth. Fragile? That is what we want you to think. That is the face we show to the galaxy because it keeps us safe. Because it makes the elder races underestimate us. She leaned closer to Ithrani, her voice dropping to something almost gentle. The humans you meet at gatherings like this are real. They truly believe in peace and cooperation. They hope that the galaxy can be a place of shared knowledge and mutual respect. But humanity is not one thing. We are many things, and some of those things are kept hidden because they are not pleasant to look upon. The outer colonies, the prison worlds, the military facilities that exist on no official map. The generation ships that went dark centuries ago and were never heard from again. Those humans are different. Ithrani shivered despite the warmth of the room. Different how? They were hardened by suffering, changed by survival, shaped by the knowledge that the universe does not care about them and that no one is coming to save them. They learned to be harder and colder than the empty space between stars. Elena rose from her chair and walked back to the window, her reflection a ghost against the backdrop of distant suns. Earth recovered from the Silith War and made peace because it was convenient. But the abandoned colonies, the exiles, the forgotten ones, they did not forget. Where are they now? Elena was silent for a long time before she answered, and when she spoke, her voice was heavy with the weight of secrets kept for decades. They are out there, in the dark between galaxies, building and waiting. They have no love for Earth and no interest in peace with species that once tried to destroy them. She turned to face the Ithrani one final time, and in her eyes was a warning that needed no words to be understood. The friendly ones are who we choose to send. Pray that you never give us a reason to send the others. Ithrani left the quarters with more questions than answers. But one thing was certain in her mind. The galaxy had made a terrible mistake in believing they understood humanity, and somewhere in the endless dark, something patient was stirring. 3 months passed since Elena spoke her words in the Great Hall, and the galaxy slowly forgot the chill that had touched their hearts that night. The elder races returned to their comfortable certainties, assuring themselves that one old human woman's warning meant nothing at all. But in the cold reaches of space, At the very edge of known territory, something was happening that would force them to remember Station Vethkaler was a Silith mining outpost, built on an asteroid rich with rare metals that powered their great ships. 300 workers lived there, drilling into the rock and sending their treasures back to the homeworld in cargo vessels that came and went like clockwork on a morning that seemed no different from any other. The cargo vessel Triumphant arrived at the station and found only silence waiting for it. The captain sent signals that went unanswered. He ordered his crew to dock and investigate, thinking perhaps the communication systems had failed. When the airlock opened, the smell that greeted them was something that would haunt their dreams forever. The station was empty of living Silith, but it was not empty of the dead. Bodies lay where they had fallen, some with weapons in their hands, and others with nothing but terror frozen on their faces. The walls were marked with burns and claw marks, evidence of a battle fought in desperation, but there were no enemy bodies to be found, no sign of who had done this terrible thing. It was as if ghosts had swept through the station and taken everyone who mattered. The captain fled back to his ship and sent an emergency signal to the Silith homeworld before jumping to faster-than-light speed. Behind him, the station continued its slow orbit around the asteroid, a tomb now instead of a place of work. Within days, more reports began to trickle in from the outer reaches of Silith space. Another mining station had gone dark, then a research facility, then a military outpost that should have been impregnable. Ships sent to investigate either returned with stories of horror or did not return at all. The conclave gathered in emergency session, fear replacing the arrogance that had filled the great hall just months before. Ketvarn was there, but the gold on his scales seemed duller now, and his voice shook when he spoke. "We are under attack," he declared to the assembled races. "An unknown enemy strikes at our borders and vanishes before we can respond. We demand the aid of our allies in finding and destroying this threat." The elder races murmured among themselves, troubled but not yet terrified. The Silith had many enemies, and raiders were not unknown in the outer regions of space, but Ithraini remembered Elena's words, and she felt ice forming in her chest as she listened to the reports. She slipped away from the gathering and made her way to the human section of the station, where Elena still kept her quarters. The old woman was waiting when Ithraini arrived, as if she had known the young diplomat would come. Her face was grim, and in her hands she held a data tablet that glowed with information. "You have heard the news," Elena said as Ithraini entered the Silith stations at the rim. "Is it?" "Yes." Elena cut her off before she could finish the question. "It is them?" "The exiles have finally decided to make themselves known." Ithraini sank into a chair, her legs suddenly weak beneath her. "How can you be certain?" Elena handed her the data tablet, and Ithraini looked at the information displayed there. It was a communication intercept, captured by a Silith ship before it jumped away from one of the destroyed stations. A human voice spoke from the recording, calm and cold as the space between stars. "You thought you won," the voice said. "You only delayed the reckoning. We remember what you did, and we have come to collect what is owed." The recording ended, and silence filled the room like water filling a sinking ship. "Who are they?" Ithraini asked, though she already knew part of the answer from what Elena had told her before. "They call themselves the Exiles, the descendants of the colonies that Earth abandoned during the Silith War. For 30 years, they have lived in the dark spaces between known stars, in regions so distant that no one thought to look for them there. How did they survive? How did they build ships capable of this?" Elena's smile was thin and without humor. "They are human, and humans are very good at surviving when we have no other choice. They captured alien technology from the Silith, who tried to conquer them. They rebuilt and improved it. They bred and trained and prepared for a day they always knew would come. Why now? Why attack after all this time?" "Because they are finally ready," Elena said simply. They have spent 3 decades building a fleet, training soldiers, planning their revenge. They are not interested in territory or resources or political power. They want only one thing. What? Elena met Ithraini's eyes with a gaze that held the weight of terrible knowledge. They want the Silith to suffer the way they suffered. They want the galaxy to know that humanity cannot be abandoned, cannot be sacrificed, cannot be forgotten without consequence. Ithraini stood and began to pace, her silver patterns flashing as fear and confusion warred within her. We must warn the Conclave. We must tell them what we know. I have already tried. They do not believe me, or perhaps they do not want to believe. It is easier to think this is some random threat that can be dealt with through diplomacy or military might. Then, what can we do? Elena walked to her window and looked out at the stars, those ancient points of light that had witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations. Somewhere out there, ships crewed by the children and grandchildren of the abandoned were moving closer, carrying grudges that had been passed down through generations. Like precious heirlooms, the Silith started a war 30 years ago and thought they won, Elena said quietly. But they only won the first battle. The true war is just beginning, and I fear the galaxy is not ready for what is coming. Another report came in that night. 3 more stations had fallen, and a Silith patrol fleet had been destroyed to the last ship. The exiles were no longer hiding in the dark. They were coming into the light, and they brought vengeance with them. The Silith homeworld of Vethsora hung in space like a green jewel, beautiful and proud, the heart of an empire that had ruled its corner of the galaxy for 10,000 years. Great cities covered its surface. Monuments to victory and power rose toward the sky. And billions of Silith lived their lives certain that nothing could ever threaten them. That certainty died on a morning that would be remembered for as long as any Silith drew breath. They came from the dark between stars, emerging from faster-than-light travel in a formation that stretched across the void like a wall of iron and fire. The exile fleet had arrived, and it was nothing like what the Silith had expected. These were not the sleek, beautiful ships that Earth's Navy used. These were monsters made of asteroid rock and salvaged metal, hulls scarred by decades of hard survival, weapons welded to their sides like teeth in the mouth of some great beast. They were ugly and brutal and terrifying in a way that no alien fleet had ever been. The Silith armada moved to intercept, confident in their numbers and their technology. They outnumbered the exile fleet 3-1, and their ships were newer and faster and built for war. Admiral Kethvorin, brother to the ambassador who had boasted in the Great Hall, commanded the defense from his flagship. Watching the enemy approach on his tactical screens, he expected the humans to hesitate, to reconsider, to recognize that they faced a force they could not defeat. The exiles did not hesitate. They charged straight into the heart of the Silith formation. And what followed was not a battle, but a slaughter. The Silith fought with precision and training, firing their weapons in coordinated volleys, maneuvering their ships in patterns perfected over centuries of warfare. They were soldiers following doctrine, confident that the rules of war would favor them. The exiles fought like animals with nothing to lose. Their ships rammed directly into Silith carriers, sacrificing themselves to create holes in the enemy formation. Their soldiers launched themselves through space in nothing but armored suits, boarding Silith vessels and fighting hand to claw in the corridors. They showed no fear because they had lived so long with fear that it no longer touched them. They showed no mercy because no mercy had ever been shown to them. They fought with a fury that the Silith had never seen and could not understand. Admiral Kethvorin watched his fleet being torn apart and could not believe what he was seeing. These were not the soft humans his brother had mocked, not the poets and scientists who attended diplomatic gatherings with smiles on their faces. These were something else entirely, something forged in the fires of abandonment and hardened by decades of suffering. They were humanity's shadow, the face that Earth kept hidden from the galaxy. Elena watched the battle from the Conclave station, receiving reports that came in fragments as the Silith communication network failed piece by piece. Beside her stood Ithrani, her blue skin pale with horror as the numbers told their terrible story. "They are being destroyed," Ithrani whispered. "The Silith are being destroyed. The Silith started this war 30 years ago," Elena replied, her voice flat and tired. "They thought they could wound humanity and face no consequences. They were wrong. Can you stop them? Can you reach the exile commanders and ask them to show mercy?" Elena was silent for a long moment before she answered. "There is one person I might be able to reach, someone I knew a very long time ago. But I do not know if she will listen." She moved to a communication terminal and entered codes that she had never expected to use. Frequencies that connected to networks hidden in the spaces between official channels. The screen flickered and then resolved into a face that Elena had not seen in 80 years. Myra looked old now, as old as Elena herself, but her eyes still held the same fierce light they had held when they were children together on New Promise. Her gray hair was cut short, and scars crossed her face like a map of the violence she had survived. "Elena," Myra said, and her voice carried no warmth. "I wondered if you would try to contact me. Myra, please. You have made your point. The Silith know now that they cannot escape what they did. You can stop this. Stop." Myra's laugh was harsh and cold. "We have waited 30 years for this day. We have buried our parents and raised our children with stories of what was done to us. We will not stop until the Silith understand what it means to be abandoned and forgotten. Then, what are your terms? What do you want?" Myra leaned closer to the screen, and in her eyes Elena saw the child she had been, the friend who had held her hand when the last ship flew away and left them to die. But that child was buried now beneath decades of pain and hatred. The Silith will return every world they took from humanity during the war. They will give us territory in their own space, where the exiles can build a new home. They will broadcast a public confession of what they did to the outer colonies and what Earth did when it abandoned us. And if they refuse, then we will not stop until there are no Silith left to refuse. Elena felt the weight of those words pressing down on her like stones. She knew Myra meant every syllable, knew that the exiles would carry out their threat without hesitation or regret. "I will bring your terms to the Conclave," Elena said finally. "But Myra, please. Once this is done, once justice has been served, can there be peace?" Myra was quiet for a long moment, and something shifted in her eyes. Perhaps it was memory, perhaps regret, perhaps just exhaustion after a lifetime of carrying hatred like a burden. "We will see," she said at last. "We will see if the galaxy has learned its lesson." The screen went dark, and Elena turned to Ithrani with the taste of ashes in her mouth. "Tell the Conclave they have one day to convince the Silith to accept these terms," she said. "After that, the exiles will resume their attack, and they will not stop until their enemies are ash." Outside the station, the stars burned cold and distant, indifferent to the fate of empires and the cries of the dying. 1 year had passed since the day the exiles came out of the dark, and the galaxy was forever changed by what it had witnessed. The great hall of the Conclave of Stars was full once again, but the atmosphere was nothing like it had been before. Where once there had been laughter and arrogance, now there was silence and careful respect. Where once the elder races had looked upon humanity with amusement, now they watched the human delegation with something very close to fear. The Silith hegemony had accepted the exile terms on the second day of the attack, when their fleet had been reduced to burning wreckage and their homeworld lay exposed to invasion. They had broadcasted their confession to every corner of the galaxy, admitting what they had done to the human colonies and what Earth had done in response. Kethvoran, the ambassador, was gone, removed from his position in disgrace. A younger Silith named Tethvalen sat in his place now, her scales marked with far less gold than her predecessor, her eyes holding the humility of someone who had learned a painful lesson. The exiles had claimed a sector of space at the edge of former Silith territory, worlds that they were already beginning to terraform and colonize. They kept to themselves mostly, trading little and speaking less, but everyone knew they were there. Everyone knew what they were capable of. Elena stood at the center of the great hall, dressed in the same simple uniform she had always worn. She had been asked to speak by both Earth's government and the exile leadership, a bridge between two halves of humanity that were only now beginning to acknowledge each other. The elder races watched her with anticipation, waiting to hear what wisdom the old human woman would share. 1 year ago, Elena began, her voice carrying through the hall without effort. Ambassador Kethvoran stood where I stand now and told you that humanity was soft and weak. He told you that his people had broken us, had taught us our place, had crushed our spirits and our strength. She paused and looked around the hall, meeting the eyes of beings who had lived for centuries, beings who had once considered humanity to be nothing more than a footnote in galactic history. He was wrong. The silence in the hall was complete. Not a breath was drawn, not a limb was shifted. Humanity is not one thing, Elena continued. We are many things, and we contain contradictions that even we do not fully understand. We are capable of great kindness and great cruelty, of mercy and vengeance, of love and hatred so deep it can burn across generations. She walked slowly as she spoke, moving through the hall like a teacher among students who had finally learned to listen. The humans you have met at gatherings like this one are real. They truly believe in peace and cooperation and the sharing of knowledge. When they smile at you and offer friendship, they mean it. These are not masks or deceptions. These are genuine parts of who we are. Tethvalen leaned forward, her eyes fixed on Elena with an intensity that spoke of lessons learned too late. But we are also what you saw 1 year ago, Elena said, and her voice grew harder. We are the children of abandoned colonies who refuse to die. We are soldiers who fight without fear because fear was burned out of us long ago. We are survivors who will do whatever is necessary to protect our own, regardless of the cost. She stopped in the center of the hall and turned in a slow circle, addressing every race present. The friendly ones are who we choose to send to places like this. They are a hope for a better future, our belief that the galaxy can be more than a collection of species waiting to destroy each other. We send them because we want to be welcomed, because we dream of a day when humanity can walk among the stars as friends and partners. Her voice softened, but lost none of its power. But never forget that they are a choice. Never forget that behind every smiling human diplomat stands the shadow of everything else we can be. Never mistake our kindness for weakness, our patience for surrender, our hope for naivety. She looked directly at Tethvalen, and the young Silith flinched as if struck. Your predecessor learned this lesson too late. The Silith hegemony paid the price for his arrogance. Let that price be a warning to everyone in this hall, to every species in this galaxy. Elena walked back to the center of the floor and stood tall despite her age, despite her scars, despite the weight of memories that pressed upon her shoulders. We send you our best, she said, and her words echoed through the hall like thunder in the distance. We send you our poets and our scientists, our dreamers and our builders, our teachers and our healers. We send them because we hope you deserve them. She paused, and in that pause, the galaxy held its breath. Pray, you never give us reason to send the rest. The hall remained silent as Elena walked back to her seat. But it was a different silence than before. It was the silence of understanding, of recognition, of respect earned through blood and fire. Ithrani found Elena after the gathering had ended, seeking her out in the corridor that led to the human section of the station. The young diplomat had grown in the past year. her silver patterns darker and more defined, her eyes holding wisdom that had not been there before. "May I ask you something?" Ithraney said as she fell into step beside Elena. "You may ask. Did Earth always know the exiles were out there? Did they know what they had created when they abandoned those colonies?" Elena smiled, and for once there was warmth in it, the kind of warmth that came from finally being able to speak a truth long held in secret. "Why do you think we have always been so friendly?" Elena replied, "Why do you think we sent poets and scientists instead of soldiers? Why do you think we worked so hard to make the galaxy see us as harmless?" Ithraney's eyes widened as understanding dawned. "You were protecting them. You were making sure no one looked too closely at the dark spaces between stars. We were protecting everyone," Elena corrected gently. "The exiles needed time to build their strength, and the galaxy needed time to forget its fear of humanity. We gave both what they needed, and we prayed that when the time finally came, enough wisdom would exist on all sides to prevent total destruction. And now?" Elena looked out through a nearby window at the stars that burned in the endless dark. Somewhere out there, the exiles were building their new home, and somewhere else, Earth was reconsidering its place in a galaxy that had finally learned what humanity truly was. "Now we begin again," she said quietly. "Now we see if this galaxy has learned enough to survive what comes next." Ithraney did not ask what came next. She was not certain she wanted to know. But as she walked beside Elena through the corridors of the conclave station, she understood one thing with perfect clarity. Humanity was awake now, all of humanity, and the galaxy would never be the same. The friendly ones were still here, still hoping, still dreaming of peace. But in the shadows behind them, something else watched and waited, and it would never be underestimated again.